Imagine you wake up tomorrow morning and the swastika is still flying. Not in 1943, not in some frantic final year of a war still being fought, but now. A world where the Third Reich did not last 12 years, but survived. Where the maps in every schoolroom show a single empire stretching from the coast of France to the mountains of the Ural. It sounds like fiction. It very nearly wasn't. Because there were moments, real, specific moments, where the war balanced on a knife's edge and a different decision, a different day of weather, a single different choice, might have handed Adolf Hitler the victory he was certain was his destiny. Today, we're going to do something most history refuses to do. We're going to follow that other timeline, not to celebrate it, to understand exactly how close it came and what kind of world we escaped. Let's be clear about what this video is and what it isn't. This is not a fantasy. We are not going to wave away the reasons Germany lost. We're going to take the war seriously and identify the exact turning points where the outcome could genuinely have gone the other way. The Battle of Britain, the decision to invade the Soviet Union, the race for the atomic bomb, and then we're going to trace, step by careful step, what a Nazi victory would actually have looked like. Not the cartoon version, the real one, built from the plans the regime had already written down. Because the most disturbing thing about a world where Hitler won is that we don't have to imagine it. He told us in documents that still exist exactly what he intended to do. To understand how Hitler could have won, you have to understand how much he had already taken by the summer of 1940. In less than a year, Germany had conquered Poland, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. Britain stood alone. Its army barely escaped from the beaches of Dunkirk. The United States was neutral and had no intention of joining. The Soviet Union was, on paper, Germany's ally. At that moment, Hitler was closer to dominating Europe than any man since Napoleon. Perhaps closer than anyone in history. Everything that followed, everything that eventually destroyed him, came from decisions he made after that summer. And each of those decisions had another door beside it. A door he chose not to walk through. Historians point to 3 of them. If the Battle of Britain had gone differently, if the invasion of Russia had been delayed, or aimed differently, or never launched at all, and if German scientists had reached the atomic bomb first. Change any one of those, and the 20th century bends in a direction almost too dark to look at directly. Turning point 1. The Battle of Britain, 1940. For weeks, the German Air Force hammered Britain's fighter defenses and came dangerously close to breaking them. Then Hitler switched his bombers from the airfields to the cities of London. It was a decision made in rage, and it gave the Royal Air Force the breathing space to survive. Had the Luftwaffe kept its focus a few weeks longer, Britain's air defense might have collapsed, and with it, any hope of invasion resistance. Turning point 2. Operation Barbarossa, 1941. Hitler turned east and invaded the Soviet Union while Britain was still undefeated, the two-front war that every German general feared. And even then he came within sight of Moscow. Historians still argue if he had struck a few weeks earlier, before the autumn rains and the Russian winter, or driven straight for the capital instead of splitting his forces, the Soviet government might have fallen. And a Soviet collapse in 1941 changes everything. Turning point 3. The bomb. Germany began the war with the finest physicists on Earth, and a genuine head start in nuclear research. But the regime's own hatred drove its greatest scientific minds into exile, many of them straight into the American program that would build the bomb first. Imagine that talent staying and Germany reaching the weapon before anyone else. A single atomic bomb over London or Moscow in 1944 would have ended the argument entirely. Now hold all 3 in your mind at once. because the world we're about to enter is the one where they all break the other way. So let's say it happens. Britain sues for peace. The Soviet Union collapses. America, facing a Reich armed with atomic weapons, decides the price of war is too high. By 1944, the fighting stops. Nazi Germany has won. Now comes the part almost no one lets themselves picture. Not the victory. What comes after it? Because the regime had already written the plan, and it did not end with soldiers. Stay with me. This is the world we escaped by a matter of weeks. A victorious Reich does not simply stop at the borders it conquered. It has a blueprint, and that blueprint has a name. General Plan Ost, the general plan for the East. On paper, it is a plan for settlement. In reality, it is a plan for the systematic emptying of Eastern Europe. Tens of millions of people in Poland, Ukraine, and Russia were to be driven out, worked to death, or simply erased to clear the land for German colonists. This was not a rumor. It was a policy document with maps and timetables. At the center of the empire, Hitler intended to remake Berlin itself into a capital called Germania, a city of monuments so vast they were designed to make a human being feel like nothing at all. A domed hall large enough to hold 180,000 people. An arch so enormous the real Arc de Triomphe would fit inside its opening. Architecture as intimidation, built to last 1,000 years. And the machinery of murder that we now call the Holocaust would not have ended with victory. It would have expanded. There would have been no liberation of the camps, no Allied armies arriving at the gates. The killing would have continued, unopposed and unrecorded, across an entire continent sealed off from the outside world. Beyond the borders, the world would have frozen into a long, cold standoff, a Nazi Europe on one side, an anxious, isolated America on the other, ringed by oceans and armed with its own bombs. Not peace, a permanent, poisoned silence, with the Reich free to do whatever it wished inside its walls, and no one left with the power to stop it. This is the world that the men on Omaha Beach, the pilots over Britain, and the soldiers freezing outside Stalingrad were standing between us and not a different flag. This. So why didn't it happen? Because at every one of those turning points, the other door was the one that opened. The Luftwaffe changed targets, and Britain survived. Hitler split his armies, and winter caught them in the open. His own ideology drove the scientists, who could have built his bomb into the arms of his enemies. Again and again, the regime's arrogance and hatred became the very things that destroyed it. That is the strange mercy hidden inside this story. The Third Reich was not undone only by tanks and courage, though it took an ocean of both. It was undone in part by its own nature. A system built on the belief that some people were worth nothing kept throwing away the very people, the very alliances, and the very chances it needed to win. The counterfactual isn't a fantasy about a stronger Hitler. It's a warning about how close catastrophe can come, and how often the difference between our world and the darkest one is measured not in decades, but in a handful of decisions made by frightened men on ordinary days. Of all those decisions, one man came to believe, long before the end, that the war was already lost, and that the only way to save Germany was to kill the man leading it. He was Hitler's most famous general, his most trusted field commander, and in October 1944, 2 officers arrived at his home with a vial of poison and a choice. Next week, Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the July Plot, and the death the regime tried to hide. Subscribe, because the story of how Hitler killed his own best general is one of the strangest of the entire war.